Abolishing nuclear weapons may seem like an idealistic, even utopian objective, but so too did banning landmines and chemical weapons and biological weapons. These were banned by the Chemical Weapons Convention in 1997 after they proved to be barbaric. So why not nuclear weapons? I caught up with Carl Alexander Robichaud, a program officer in charge of international peace and security at Carnegie Foundation of New York, to discuss the issues related to nuclear weapons in this 21st century. My name is Martin Rogers. Good to meet you, sir. What are the major concerns regarding nuclear weapons in this 21st century?
We assume that nuclear deterrence will remain stable, but I don't think that's an assumption we should make. There are a lot of geopolitical challenges that are coming up now. Tensions between the U.S. and Russia are the worst that they've been in 30 years. There are conflicts between India and Pakistan that appear to be at the brink of crisis. And when you add to that nuclear weapons, the potential consequences go much higher. The single use of a nuclear weapon would be devastating. And more countries are relying on nuclear weapons as a way to ensure their security. And layered on this existing nuclear deterrence is rapid technological change. And this creates a new risk vector. You have cyber weapons. You have the ability to target with high precision. And essentially, what we've done is compress the decision-making.
Iran has accused the United States of violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty by modernizing its nuclear weapons instead of moving toward disarmament. The United States accuses Iran of nuclear extortion. Same with Russia and Tehran, India and Pakistan. What do you make of this? Would you say politics?
Oh, absolutely. These weapons are seen as the ultimate guarantor of national security by the people who are in power. And so they see this as being their guarantee. Provides a great deal of power and influence to have nuclear weapons. And even though they feel threatened by the other side's nuclear weapons, they rely on their own nuclear weapons as a crutch in many ways. And the thought of giving them up is very politically unpalatable. You see with President Obama, his speech that we should work towards a world free of nuclear weapons. That was very popular among some people. Other people saw it with great suspicion and fear, the sense that we would be leaving ourselves vulnerable. So politics always come into play, both on the national level and national decision-making, but also in international decision-making.
Now, has there been any efforts to engage countries to end the use of nuclear weapons?
Yeah, so there's a long history of arms control engagement, starting between the U.S. and Russia, but with other countries as well, to try to reduce the number of nuclear weapons or the types of delivery vehicles that were used to deliver nuclear weapons. Certain systems are seen as being destabilizing or especially risky. Systems that have multiple warheads, systems that have very low warning times. And starting in the 1980s, Presidents Reagan and Gorbachev met and negotiated the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Agreement, which limited a whole class of missiles that were seen as especially destabilizing. Similarly, there have been formal or informal negotiations that have convinced countries not to acquire nuclear weapons or not to increase the size of their arsenal. And so there's a long history of effective diplomacy in reducing nuclear risk. One of the programs that we helped fund, we funded the pilot programs for the Non-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, which helped secure vulnerable nuclear materials in the former Soviet Union after the Soviet Union collapsed and was awash in nuclear materials but didn't have any budget resources to secure them. So that helped prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and nuclear materials to other countries or potentially to non-state actors. So there's a long history of international cooperation to contain this threat. We can't do it without international cooperation. We need to come back to the table and work together, the U.S. and Russia, but all of the nuclear possessor states, to try to figure out what can we practically do, what can we commit to that is politically acceptable to us, that reduces risk levels and provides greater security for everyone, not just our own citizens, but for the world. That's what we've lost.
What are the dangers that the use of nuclear weapons pose to humanity?
Well, it's not clear entirely what that threat is, but there were studies done in the 1980s and 90s about nuclear winter. Some of those studies were updated with the most recent climate science, which draws on advanced modeling and suggests that the use of even 5 to 100 nuclear weapons, I say even because that's a small use scenario compared to some of the scenarios that call for all-out nuclear war. But even a relatively small nuclear war could have devastating climate consequences, could ruin crops and create widespread famine that would result in billions of deaths. And I'm not deeply familiar with that climate science, but it's something I'm very concerned about because I've read some of the reports. And that's one of the reasons nuclear weapons are a humanitarian risk, not just to the countries involved in any nuclear conflict, but to everyone living on this planet.
Okay. Now, what are the contents of the treaty, the Non-Proliferation Treaty?
Essentially, it's a bargain between the countries that have nuclear weapons and those that don't yet have nuclear weapons as of the signature of the date in 1968. And it's a deal that countries that don't have nuclear weapons won't acquire them. Countries that have nuclear weapons won't pass them on to other countries and will work towards the ultimate elimination of nuclear weapons. And that countries with civilian nuclear technology will help other countries share in the benefit of the peaceful use of nuclear technology, which has tremendous promise both for energy generation, but also for medicine and agriculture. And that deal is 50 years old. It's been one of the most successful treaties in the world in terms of limiting the spread of nuclear weapons, but it certainly hasn't eliminated nuclear weapons. The numbers have come down since the height of the Cold War, but that tells only part of the story, because even while there are fewer nuclear weapons than there were 30 years ago, it's not clear that their use is less likely. And there are a number of countries that continue to rely on nuclear deterrence and in ways that are quite risky.
Now, the treaty is silent on countries that refuse to end the use of nuclear weapons. What do you think needs to be done?
So 95% of the nuclear weapons and materials are in the hands of two countries, the US and Russia. They need to come back to the table and figure out pragmatic steps to reduce the arms race, to prevent another arms race, and to increase decision-making time, to give their leaders more time to make wise decisions so that we are not triggered into an accidental or inadvertent nuclear war. More broadly, there needs to be negotiations about how we can reduce the number and role of nuclear weapons in international affairs. The status quo where 9 countries have nuclear weapons and nobody else does is not sustainable. There are lots of other countries that could develop nuclear weapons if they chose to, and their needs need to be taken into consideration as well. I'm very concerned about the situation in India and Pakistan. Both of those countries seem to be relying more on nuclear weapons, at least for rhetorical purposes and possibly for military purposes as well. North Korea relies heavily on nuclear weapons for its security, and it would be great to see an agreement there that lowered the temperature on that crisis. And then finally, there's Iran, which we know had a nuclear weapons program. It froze all of its nuclear activities in that regard and was on track through this Iran nuclear agreement to assure the world that it was not developing a nuclear program. The U.S. pulled out of that program, and we find ourselves in a really challenging situation right now. Can we reach another agreement with Iran that provides the assurance that they're not developing nuclear weapons and provides them some of the benefits of nuclear technology? That remains to be seen.
The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is facing several serious challenges. There are increasing doubts about its effectiveness in preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We'll explore more in our second part of this story.